Hello, everyone. Welcome again to AI Reset to Zero with my dear nephew, Neal Makwana, and myself, Michael Parekh. We're here to talk about AI vibes for the week. We've had quite a few things happen this week. We were all set, really, right, Neil, to talk about Google I/O, Input Output, and their amazing conference where they kind of hit it out of the park with a range of products, everything from Gemini 2.5, Gemini Live, a whole array of software and hardware innovations, etc. I had a post up on Substack, post number 727. We'll have it in the show notes that talked a lot about that. And that was going to be the main topic. And then, guess what? OpenAI, as they do all the time, said, hold my beer. Sam Altman and Jony Ive, the Uber designer from Apple, said, oh, we've got something that's also about I/O. And they announced, right after the first day of Google I/O, a merger of OpenAI and I/O Products, which is a company founded by Jony Ive as part of Love From, which is his design company since he left Apple in 2019. And it was a notable merger worth $6.5 billion in OpenAI stock. Meaningful because OpenAI at its last $40 billion raise is valued at $300 billion, which means Jony Ive and his 55 key ex-Apple Uber designers who are now going to be part of OpenAI, and Jony Ive will oversee design at OpenAI without being an employee. Technicality, we'll go into those details if you like later on. But this company is now part of OpenAI when it closes, about a 2% stake at this valuation. And it is a literal shot across the bow by OpenAI that they intend on being an Uber consumer AI company, right smack in the middle of what everything Google is trying to do, Meta is trying to do, and Apple over there is trying to do. In fact, the news was of such import that Apple was down a couple of percentage points on the news that, the former designer who was a spiritual partner of Steve Jobs, who helped design the iconic products at Apple, everything from the first iMac to the iPod, the iPhone, and MacBooks, etc., is now going to be designing a whole array of things at OpenAI without being an employee of OpenAI. So very, very unusual arrangements. The media is full of this new set of news. And so we thought today, given that Neil and I are very fixated on, we have been, right, Neil, talking about Apple and all these products from a product design point of view, talk a lot about this actually on this show with some specific points that I think you bear underlining. And that's why we're going to play you some clips from a variety of these announcements to make the narrative, to tell you a story that I think is going to be compelling and something that you will not hear in other places about what's going on. So as a first step, let's talk about Jony Ive a little bit in terms of his relationship with Steve Jobs and how they created this extraordinary mystique about what Apple has become, not just in the products that we all know and love and use, but the very act of interacting with these products, even opening the box, the packaging. In fact, my post on this news was literally an iPhone box that opens and closes. And this is something that did not just happen by happenstance. And Jony Ive was at another conference a few days ago with the co-founder of Stripe, talking a little bit about this, about how they focused on things that most people would not focus on, especially technology companies, and made it such a magical thing to be re-experienced by mainstream people.
Yeah, let's go ahead. Pull it up real quick.
Actually, I remember working on some absurd details in terms of packaging, and in such a I mean, this compared to what you guys do, this will seem so trivial, but I had such a clear awareness that in designing a certain solution for example, how we managed a cable that's in a box. That designing that, I knew that millions of people would engage with this little tab, and I can either make the cable an easy thing to unwrap. Sorry, that is such a trivial example, isn't it?
But clearly you think that, I mean, you can describe the purpose of that in seconds saves, that shaves 5 seconds off the unwrapping of every cable and multiply it across hundreds of millions. But I get the sense from you that's not why you do it. It's not this trivial utilitarian multiplication and calculation. There's something spiritual in it for you. What's the spiritual thing?
I think the spiritual thing is that I believe that when somebody unwrapped that box and took out that cable and they thought somebody gave a shit about me, I think that's a spiritual thing. And I think it's a way... And I know I'm in good company here. I know that when you know what used to depress me was this sense that solving a functional imperative, then we're done. But of course that's not enough. That's not the characteristic of an evolved society, of an evolved species. And so that Sunday afternoon when I really should have been out with my boys, and I'm worrying about this, I did feel a connection and an excitement that somebody was going to experience something that they don't even know exists yet. And even though it was a small thing, it really did come genuinely from a place of love and of care. And Steve spoke about this. I mean, he spoke about it way more eloquently than I can, but he talked about when you make something with love and with care, even though the people that you've made it for, you don't know their story. They don't know your story. You'll never even shake their hands. But when they use the product that you've made, it's a way, and the way Steve expressed it, I thought was so beautiful. He said, it's a way of expressing our gratitude to the species. And I thought that was such an incredibly thoughtful and beautiful and authentic declaration.
Neal, shivers down my spine. You're the product god. Ever since you were barely a teenager, we've been talking about this, and this spiritual attention to detail is something that's embedded in you. I've seen it so many times. Can you talk a little bit about this? What does this make you think about?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's just great to see someone like Johnny, who's obviously worked on some of the most influential tech in the last couple of decades. I think it's really good that OpenAI was able to kind of get him, just because you can see this in the way he talks, how passionate he is about these small, little things that people would find mundane, but end up really influencing a lot of the feeling that people get when they use these products. Obviously, now any packaging you open it feels very Apple-like from
It's
whether
all
it's
Apple's fine.
Samsung, Google, anyone. But this was the person that kind of influenced that kind of wave of attention to detail and kind of putting the customers first. So when it does come to OpenAI and the kind of pole position they have right now in this kind of AI race, I think it's really important that they partnered up with someone like Ive, who I think will be able to actually drive value in a physical product, since that is obviously what they seem to be venturing into next. Yeah, I mean, you can just see in the way he talks about. I mean, it's no coincidence that the company he founded after he left Apple is called Love From, because it is really stuff done with compassion and care. And I think it's a great partnership, and it's gonna be very exciting to kind of see what they are able to make in a few years.
Well said. I think the other point to add here is the empathizing on pain points that the mainstream doesn't realize are pain points, but they, in hindsight, are, of course, extraordinary pain points, friction points that we didn't know we had. With AI in these very beginning days, with ChatGPT success, almost 1 billion people use it now daily or monthly, and a few 100 million daily. it's still a very cumbersome product. And to that extent, one production that Sam and Jony did as part of this announcement a day after the Google I.O., and they did it very well. Everyone, by the way, we'll have links to all of this in the show notes. I have a post number 728 that talks a lot about this. And we'd like to play you a minute or two of the 9-minute video that Sam and Jony did, produced beautifully on a sunny Friday, May 2nd, almost a month ago. So this was all preordained and planned. It's very nicely choreographed. They're walking down separately down streets in San Francisco and coming to a restaurant. By the way, that's the Zoetrope, which is owned by Francis Ford Coppola, the famous director, and vintner. He has a huge vineyard. We've all consumed his wines. But the interesting thing there is that the way they choose to introduce this merger of these two companies is interesting in the words and the feeling and the interaction. So why don't we play that for a minute?
2 years ago, Jony and I started talking about what the future of AI and new kinds of computers was going to look like. I was running OpenAI. Jony was running a design firm called LoveFrom that had established itself as really the, I think, densest collection of talent that I've ever heard of in one place and probably has ever existed in the world. And it became very quickly apparent to both of us that we needed a third company.
A year ago, I founded I.O. with Scott Cannon, Evans Hankey, and Tang Tan, who are the most extraordinary engineers. They have built a team of remarkable subject matter experts that range from hardware and software engineering, physicists, researchers, product manufacturing experts. And so I.O. is merging with OpenAI.
Formed with the mission of figuring out how to create a family of devices that would let people use AI to create all sorts of wonderful things.
The first one we've been working on, I think, has just completely captured our imagination.
You know, Jony called one day and said, "This is the best work our team has ever done."
Yeah.
I mean, Jony did the iPhone. Jony did the MacBook Pro. I mean, these are like the defining ways people use technology. It's hard to beat those things. Those are really wonderful. Jony recently gave me one of the prototypes of the device for the first time to take home, and I've been able to live with it. And I think it is the coolest piece of technology that the world will have ever seen.
The products that we're using to deliver and connect us to unimaginable technology, they're decades old.
Yeah.
And so it's just common sense to at least think, surely there's something beyond these legacy products.
We have like magic intelligence in the cloud. If I wanted to ask ChatGPT something right now about something we had talked about earlier, think about what would happen. I would like reach down, I would get out my laptop, I'd open it up, I'd launch a web browser, I'd start typing, I'd have to like explain that thing, and I would hit enter and I would wait and I would get a response. And that is at the limit of what the current tool of a laptop can do. But I think this technology deserves something much better.
So it's obvious they've given this some thought, Neal. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, even just given down to the fact that, they say they've been working on this for 2 years. I mean, the team that Johnny's kind of assembled, the three main people he mentioned, just to like get a little bit of background on each. I mean, Evans was Johnny's successor after he left in 2019. Evans ended up leaving in 2022 to obviously join what is now LoveFrom and I.O. Tan was, leading up the iPhone at Apple, and then Scott was, working on the Mac and iPad. So, I mean, this is obviously people who touched arguably the most influential and mainstream products throughout everything. I mean, whether it's a tablet, a wearable, a phone, or just design overall at Apple. I mean, these are the best of the best. And it's kind of what Sam touched on is that, these people think they've made something that's better than all those things. It has to actually be really good. I think that there's a lot of really interesting potential in this in this partnership, and I think it'll be fascinating to see. I mean, they've obviously given this a lot of thought, given this a lot of time, and they've kind of gone back to what it means to be a product and this kind of like first principles approach as to I think it's really important how they touched on the pain point of, and it's something I think you couldn't really said any better, that we are using all these really amazing AI tools, but we're using them on legacy products that have existed for decades. I mean, obviously computers have changed over time, but in the end of the day, it's the same interface. It's a screen, it's a keyboard and a mouse. And I know, we talked about this last week and we're going to touch on this in a bit, but this kind of interaction and this marriage of, a voice and a GUI, a graphical user interface where someone can actually kind of go fully hands-free and had this kind of agentic experience with AI. I think it'll be really special to see what they are able to come up with.
And of course, there's a lot of guessing going on with this big announcement. The whole world is watching. Competitors are very laser focused to see if they can copy things or rush things that they've got under development. And you can imagine there's a lot of speculation and a lot of leaks. In our Substack post number 728 from yesterday, we've got like the most recent 3-4 sets of leaks out there that describe this. And the best guess people have right now, no one knows, is it something that looks like a pin and has some microphones, cameras maybe, and as real time always on, and processes and runs OpenAI's amazing technologies, whether it's ChatGPT, reasoning agents, etc., whatever is to come magically for people without them realizing that they need it. So that is where this stuff is going. But there's also, as you can imagine, probably some misdirection that they should do. And right now, if you look at this very well-known analyst Ming Chi Kuo, who's very close to Apple's supply chain, these are some of the his predictions on what is to expect. Mass production of this device probably in 2027. Sam Altman, when he and Jony introduced this merger within the company at OpenAI a day after this announcement, they said they're targeting about 100 million units in production, which will, sometime probably starting later next year. So it'll take a year or so to ramp up. And the best guess is something form factor wise, point number 3 here, that it looks like something like the Humane AI Pin, which was a startup that was last year's AI device of wonder, also ex-Apple designers. Unfortunately, it didn't work. The company got sold to HP. But the device is supposedly about the size of an iPod Shuffle. Toward the end of this podcast, we'll show you some pictures of possible form factors. And then the other thing here is that they're pointing out that there probably be no display functionality. That will probably leverage your smartphone, your computer, laptop, etc. for display. That may be a misdirection, given what Sam specifically said at another VC presentation we talked about on last week's podcast, where he specifically talked, when he was asked about where does he see voice fitting at OpenAI, he said, well, it may not just be voice, but voice plus a GUI. Let's play that again to remind folks.
For sure.
Hi, Sam. I was really excited to play with the voice model in the playground. And so I have 2 questions. The first is, how important is voice to OpenAI in terms of like stack ranking for infrastructure? And can you share a little bit about how you think it'll show up in the product and ChatGPT, the core thing?
I think voice is extremely important. Honestly, we have not made a good enough voice product. That's fine. Like, it took us a while to make a good enough text model too. We will crack that code eventually. And when we do, I think a lot of people are going to want to use voice interaction a lot more. I am super, when we first launched our current voice mode, the thing that was most interesting to me was it was a new stream on top of like the touch interface. And you could talk and be like clicking around on your phone at the same time. And I continue to think there's something amazing to do about like voice plus GUI interaction that we have not cracked. But before that, we'll just make voice really great. And when we do, I think there's not only is it cool with existing devices, but I sort of think voice will enable a totally new class of devices if you can make it feel like truly human level voice.
So, Neal, I think, at this time when he made those comments, they'd already probably shot that video that we saw. So
Yes,
This is something that's been on his mind, and you can see that. But what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, with the hindsight of kind of going back and knowing that they would have shot this video by then, this is something that's been in the news for a couple of years now that we're working on this product, and you can tell that obviously the question was framed more from where's the voice model at and how does this kind of fit into the lineup of products that they have. But I think obviously Sam is not thinking anymore about just ChatGPT as a website. He's thinking about it as
Correct.
a service and how it plugs into physical hardware. And yeah, I mean that voice GUI interaction, it's been shown in movies for years now, where there's stuff like Iron Man back in the day where he's talking but he's also interacting with an interface.
The movie Her,
No,
which
exactly. So I mean, it's
Sam is
just
very excited about. Yeah.
exactly. I know they had that whole controversy last year with using Scarlett Johansson's voice for the initial voice model, but they he's obviously thought a lot about this, and this is kind of the next frontier because you go from just kind of this mundane typing back and forth and getting a chat response to having really this like fully holistic experience where you're talking, you're scrolling on a screen, you're asking questions about what you can see in front of you with a camera, what you can hear around you with a microphone. I mean, that is kind of where the future of this tech is going. It's kind of what Jony talked about last, is that we need to kind of evolve from these like legacy interfaces almost that we have. I know he's talked about, we first started with the terminal, then we went to the GUI, and now we're at touch. I mean, this is kind of the next frontier of that, is how do we incorporate voice and kind of tie everything, into one product. So I think it'll be very cool to see what they end up coming up with.
And it's interesting also, this idea of multimodality AI, fusing it with GUIs, etc. You can't do it today in today's latest chatbots. They all kind of stop at their specific modality, but the integration's coming. In fact, we got a hint of it a few months ago when Google showed off their Apple Vision Pro type of glasses called XR glasses. It's called Project Muhan, which they actually, at this week's I/O, they showed off that a little bit more, along with smarter glasses like Meta's smart glass, Ray-Ban smart glasses. So there's a whole spectrum of products coming from Google. But it'll be interesting because I think 2 or 3 months ago, they showed that XR product to one of the top tech reviewers, MKBHD, who just, by the way, passed 20 million viewers. Congratulations, MKBHD. We're big fans here. But there's a clip in that piece where MKBHD, Marquez, gets excited about that differentiation where voice and GUI come together. We should play that clip, Neil.
Yeah.
I love that even more. But hear me out. The Gemini integration was actually the most interesting part to me. And it might not even be for the reason that you're expecting, but I think it was really cool. So at any point, you can just go home and hit the Gemini button and just talk to it. Basically, it starts running an instance of Gemini Live in the background. The live conversational version of Gemini that you can sort of talk back and forth with and carry on a full conversation with. It does that in the headset. And also, Gemini is multimodal, which in the headset means that it can see everything that you're seeing. So you can ask Gemini about something that's just in front of you, and it can give you answers just like as if you'd taken a picture of it with your phone. So it can translate signs or answer trivia questions or just tell you about what you're looking at, etc. Can you take me to here?
Sure, that looks like Wadi Rum in Jordan.
One update I would like is for it to be able to subscribe to YouTube channels and like videos, but it doesn't seem to be able to do that yet, so you have to do it with your mouse and keyboard. Whoa. So that was cool, but Gemini can also navigate the UI for you. So it was able to move around windows, organize my windows for me, close a bunch of windows, and then it can actually move around inside of apps. I believe this would just work with spatial apps, but I was having a lot of fun messing around inside of Google Maps and just jumping around to different places just by talking to Gemini and then occasionally selecting things with a pinch. And Gemini would know how to search for things. It would know how to use a search box. It would find things in maps, switch the UI from street view to the zoomed out view. It could do all of this through voice. And that saves a ton of moving my hands through the air to the point where it was pretty significant. Hey, Gemini, take me to the South Mountain Reservation.
I can do that.
And then there's also built-in circle to search in real life. It was a little buggy when I was playing with it, but the idea is really cool still. So if you hold down the top right button on the headset, it plays a little animation, and then you can pinch your fingers together and just circle in real life whatever you want to search. And it pops up a window exactly the way it would on an Android phone, and Google searches that thing. And it's so sick when it works. It seems so obvious for a Google headset, but yeah, I'm glad it's actually here. Now, it is still...
There we got it. Voice plus GUI, right, Neil?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of goes back to what we mentioned, on last week's episode. Is kind of OpenAI only has so much that I think they'll be able to do, compared to, your Googles and your Apples, because they do control the entire device. They have an OS behind this. I know, this is something I'm sure Jony and Sam are going to have to figure out for this device is, what they're going to have to build an OS from scratch. Obviously, this is why they've hired, some of the best engineers from Apple. How will this get built? We'll have to see. But I think having full control of the stack and all the apps is the only way this voice and GUI interaction is actually possible. Otherwise, you're really just in a chat interface, and apps are not going to want to give access to chat, to write emails, to do phone calls. It only happens when you have full control of the OS. So I think it'll be a really interesting competition to see. Is OpenAI actually able to make any progress on this without having that type of capability?
And the only two companies that have full control of the stack are Google with Android and Apple with iOS and macOS, etc. Even Mark Zuckerberg at MetaOS, even though he has managed to successfully sell over 2 million of these Ray-Bans, the smart glasses, which Google is now going to have their own version next year as well, for $350, whatever. Mark Zuckerberg is frustrated that he can't get access to Apple's lower tech stack to be able to really integrate functionality from here to there. And the point we're making is that these things that we're talking about are not new discoveries, but people know that they have to solve these problems and issues. And how these pain points are solved are what's the next battle over the next 18 to 24 months. And even though this discussion today is really taken over by OpenAI and I/O, Google I/O did have a video that was interesting that we should probably play a clip of, where they showed Gemini Live, which is their equivalent of multimodal Gemini, off a Android smartphone that literally was being used by one of your tribe, Neil, Gen Z, literally using it like, most of us older folks would not think of it. It's part of something called Project Astra, which will need to get productized. But this example that they showed where this thing does a bunch of things with AI is illustrative, I think, of what everybody, especially OpenAI and I/O, are aiming toward. Why don't we play that clip? Because this is from Google just this week, a day before the OpenAI announcement.
I'm here with the latest research prototype of Project Astra, and we're going to see how it can help me fix my bike. Hey, go online and look for a user's manual for a Huffy mountain bike.
I have found a user manual for you. What would you like to know about it?
Okay, cool. Now scroll until you find the section about the brakes.
Sure thing. Looking for that page now.
I think I stripped this screw. Can you go on YouTube and find a video for how to fix that?
Of course. I'm opening YouTube now. This looks like a good video.
Place a rubber band over the head of the screw.
Oh, nice.
Press down
Thanks.
firmly.
Can you go through my emails with the bike shop and find which size hex nut I need?
Sure. According to the email from Bicycle Habitat, you need a 3/8" hex nut for your sprocket. I've highlighted the correct bin for you.
It seems like I need a spare tension screw. Can you call the nearest bike shop and see what they have in stock?
Yep. Calling them now. I'll get back to you with what they have in stock.
I think my brake pads are wearing down. Can you check the manual again and see if it talks about them anywhere?
According to the manual, if you look on page 24...
Do you want to get lunch?
Yeah, give me 5 minutes. Can you finish what you were saying?
As I was saying, if you look on page 24, section 2, you'll see how to replace the brake pads.
Hey, any updates on that call?
Yep, I just got off of the bike shop. They confirmed they have your tension screw in stock. Would you like me to place a pickup order?
Could you show me some examples of dog baskets I can put on my bike?
Sure, I can help you with that. Just give me a moment. Here are some options. I think Zuka would look really great in these.
thought that was an amazing video. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of where this tech, is going to go and really should go to really have very strong impact on people. I mean, having this fully hands-free experience where you can pick up, point your camera, get interrupted by a friend, and not lose your train of thought with the conversation. I mean, this is kind of what's been promised for a long time. I know, Apple with the Apple Intelligence, I know they'll get to it eventually, but they demoed similar stuff to this where you're going to be able to point at things and kind of get information in real time. But I think this conversational piece, this whole agentic person you kind of have on your side at all times, is where the future of this tech is going. And if kind of circling back to the other IO announcement, Sam and Jony, if they are able to capture even a little bit of this in a product that can kind of sit on you at all times, I think it'll be super, super useful, to everyone.
And remember, this, according to them, this is the first of a family of products. So this is a long-term endeavor and to solve a pain point. And then if you go back to what the analyst Ming-Chi Kuo was talking about, the first product is something that can go in a pocket, on a desk, about the size of a shuffle. We have a picture of a shuffle, which we can show you. You may not even remember this. This is the iPod Shuffle, which is not that big. It was meant to be potentially put in a pocket. You could wear it on a lanyard. But the thing is, it's not just going to be something that has a microphone and speaker. It'll also need a camera. So that brings up, Google itself had a product called Google Clips, which didn't do well. I think we have a picture of that, which was also the size of the same thing, because you need a camera to be aware of what's going on around you, etc. And all of this has a lot of social, legal, regulatory issues as well, because these devices are going to be always on. We're going to, in many states, a dozen or more states, there's legal restrictions on recording things, etc. And so you need to get second party permission. And I've written about this in a post just a few days ago. We'll put it up in the show notes as well. And so there are a lot of social issues, creepiness issues for people, which are all things that have to be overcome, because the technology is neat. The technologists will always invent all kinds of cool technology. It's just that, how does it get accepted? How fast it gets accepted are all big questions to be answered. And the opportunity set is there for companies large, medium, and small. I have around me at least 3 or 4 devices that record everything, conversations, the Claude, which, basically is a note keeper for conversations, which I use with people's permission. And then, it transcribes things, summarizes things through AI, using ChatGPT, for instance. And so all of this is coming, and we're in the barely early days of all of this. And it's all very exciting, obviously, also in the context of other wearables like glasses and rings and so on. And right now, judging on the 2 IOs, Neil, Google is in a good position. They have the full stack, meaning they have the compute, which is actually the most scarce, because NVIDIA and TSMC can't make enough chips. Google has its own TPU chips. They're on the 7 generations of these things called Ironwood, which was in our post on the Google I/O thing, which you can read about. OpenAI is spending over $100 billion with SoftBank on infrastructure, on data centers to support all that. And so this is a $300 billion valuation company that's going up against companies valued at $2-3 trillion. And you've got one company, Google, which is doing reasonably well on all of these fronts. The other one, Apple, is not perceived to be doing well in most people's eyes. I disagree. I think Apple, and I think you and I are on the same camp. Apple has a lot of assets and capabilities, and so they should very well be able to do a lot of these things as well, whether it's on their own or potentially through acquisitions. There's a lot of speculation that, hey, in the current environment, they could potentially buy, there are a lot of other things they could do to accelerate if they want to. They could buy Perplexity, etc., which is one possibility, because that's another standalone AI native startup that has done a very good job of leveraging all the large language models and through very clever user interface innovations. And we did a video on it a few days ago, where in my mind, Perplexity is almost our DeepSeek at the, just this bare knuckle creativity and scrappiness and innovation around AI technologies from a bottom-up point of view. And then the other, the other thing is, strange things have happened. Steve Jobs, who founded Apple, was kicked out of his company, created a thing called Next in the 1990s. I was helping taking it public back in, my Goldman Sachs days. And then, Apple decided to buy Next, the whole kit and caboodle, for an astronomical sum back then of a few $100 million, and bring Steve Jobs back. And Steve Jobs, with their first product, with the help of Jony Ive, was iMac, which is this translucent, wonderful Mac that its key killer feature was that the modem was built in. You could go on the internet. In the 90s, everyone wanted to go on the internet. And that was the core killer feature, other than it being beautiful and translucent, Jony Ive style. And my point being, what we saw this week with IO2, with OpenAI and IO, was essentially Jony Ive and Sam Altman saying together that we're friends, we've known each other, share values, we understand the Steve Jobs ethos, and basically setting up Sam Altman as potentially the heir apparent to the Steve Jobs mantle, or Jony Ive doing his Jony Ive thing again. And stranger things have happened. I'm not forecasting this, but it's not unreasonable to think of a scenario where in some not too distant future, Apple could say, hey, we'll just buy OpenAI, and with all of this kit and caboodle, and go up directly against Google and everybody else, because this is a game of scale. The point is the technologies are moving much faster than anything we saw on the PC and the internet age. They're going up in functionality, capabilities, dozens of times in a year, as opposed to 2 or 3 times, according to Moore's law. And so speed is of the essence, scale is of the essence in terms of the infrastructure, the billions of dollars that are going to be required to serve the intelligence tokens that have to be created. One of the things Google showed in the I/O is how they've gone up from serving 10 million tokens to 400 million tokens in just a year. That's credit to their infrastructure. So the investments are massive, and the scaling is the imperative. And the scaling requirements are trifurcating. I've got posts on that, which we'll put in the notes as well. So, Apple, OpenAI, love from, not out of the picture. I'm not saying it'll happen, but the relative valuations are there. You've got the OpenAI is at 300 million, Apple's at 3 trillion. 10%, 20%, not unreasonable numbers, especially when Sam Altman specifically said at his introduction to the merger to his employees that this merger he thought was a $1 trillion opportunity. So again, none of these are stock forecasts, but I just wanted to point that out. And most importantly, all the stuff as it rolls out, Neil, you and your generation are going to be leading the pain points. So are there any other pain points of all of this stuff that you think these smart folks ought to pay attention to?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mentioned this last week during our call, but there is still this whole, with this potential next shift, to this fourth interface being, this voice and GUI marriage. I think there is a little bit of a concern potentially for it being too reliant on voice. There is this whole social norm of, if you're walking around, if you're talking to a pair of glasses, if you're talking into your phone, into your watch, it's not a normal thing that people are used to right now. Obviously, phones weren't normal before, so trends will catch on and norms will evolve over time. But in the meanwhile, I do think that, there's this whole thing. Are they trying to kind of misdirect with this whole idea of there's not going to be a display or not? I think one thing that Apple did well, and is a reason I've been using Siri more. I mean, it's not a secret that Siri has been bad for a very long time. And obviously, just before this most recent update, Siri was only voice. I've been using Siri a lot more ever since they've added the type to Siri feature where you can kind of tap on your phone and type. Otherwise, I'd have to pull my phone out in public with other people to ask a question. And, it's just not the most natural thing that someone can do. So I do think pain point wise, at least from a user interface, user experience point of view, still giving people the ability to type as well as use their voice. Obviously, there's the whole camera piece as well, being able to point to things and ask, what is this? How can I buy this? But I think something that's really interesting use case wise, and you see all these demos. I know, in MKBHD's video where a lot of the use cases, and this is, most likely just like a company corporation thing where, they want you to show the AI being used to buy concert tickets, to buy shoes, to get, plan a trip abroad. I think the real use in this comes with like context of your personal habits. I know Apple did this series of ads with Bella Ramsey from The Last of Us, which is on HBO, that she would have her phone and she'd ask, who is this guy in this room of people that, I had a meeting with him last week, but I'm forgetting. I mean, these are real things that a lot of people have.
Totally.
We're meeting people all the time. We're forgetting names, and you don't want to ever be in an embarrassing moment where you walk up to someone and they know you and you don't know them. So use cases like that, I think, where, you're going to be able to remember a conversation you had with someone, remember that not only stuff like just remember their name or who they are, but remember things that you mentioned to them, whether it's a text, whether it's an email. And this kind of goes back to having full control of the entire stack. I mean, it's going to be potentially, Apple is able to acquire OpenAI in some way in the future, and they're able to. This is kind of how OpenAI is able to mitigate this. But until OpenAI has control over things like email and phone, it'll be very interesting to see how they're navigating this whole personal context. Because otherwise, you're placing a lot of reliance just on chat and people kind of sharing information within there. Obviously, in last week's episode, we talked about Sam, explaining how the memory feature being added to chat has been such a game changer for context. And, he, in that full 30-minute interview, if you watch it, he talks about how he sees the future of OpenAI being this one small model that can operate across your entire context and kind of plug into external, third party things to kind of get things done for you. But I think until context is really thought through fully, that would be the biggest pain point, because booking a ticket, planning a trip, these are things that it's great to have AI to help you to do it, but it's these everyday small little tasks that you would never think about before where I think the real value is going to be found.
Well said. No, I think that summarizes it well in terms of the opportunity set. And then I'll just add one other thing, because the other big acquisition OpenAI made just a few days ago was Windsurf for $3 billion on the coding side. And also we discussed this last week, where Sam specifically went out of his way to say that AI coding is something that's deep integral to all of this, that, these systems now can create applications and coded programs on the fly for billions of users. And it's not stretch to think that that capability could be wrapped in to whatever family of products that Sam and Jony come up with, that basically takes advantage of that AI coding capability, which today is just a very successful vertical for AI, but tomorrow could be a fundamental enabler of these technologies. So I think there's a lot of stuff here, and I'm glad we had a chance to talk about it. I hope you all enjoyed some of the clips kind of strung together to kind of tell the story, hopefully in a slightly different way. If you have thoughts, questions, please hit us up in the comments and emails and etc. And again, we want to thank you all for joining us. We want to wish you a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. And until next time, thank you. Stay tuned.
Thank you.